Welcome to the Scott Holm Podcast. We are back here on a Wednesday night with almost exactly 24 hours until the return of a Houston Cougar sports contest that counts in the record books. Just over 2 weeks to the return of Cougar football and just over a week to the return of a top 25 Cougar volleyball program that we are all really excited about here tonight. We're going to continue our annual football preview series with the offense, an intriguing group with a number of key questions by a number of interesting players, as well also previewing the perennial first team back in action for a season, the Cougar soccer program, as well. May also find some time to talk about the Cougar men's hoopers completing their trip down under, and I was able to resist doing a bad Aussie accent there, so we're already off on a good note. Dustin, it's just the two of us tonight. The OG podcast host, as Bobby is off doing a work thing, his company's big annual thing in Tennessee. How are you holding up, my friend?
Man, I'm doing well. I'm excited to be now, 25 hours and 25 minutes from the first ever sporting event that involves a Big 12 Cougar program. So not that anyone's counting or anything, but really looking forward to that. And, I know we were talking before we started recording here that we both have a lot of notes here and really a lot to talk about. So it's a Cougar football offense that I'm intrigued by. It's a Cougar soccer program that I'm intrigued by. I'm pretty sure some variation on the word intrigued is about 10 or 12 times in my notes. So I'm intrigued to see how this episode goes.
Well, I'm intrigued that you're intrigued. And Dustin, I have some podcast business here right at the top. I've been remiss the last couple weeks in not mentioning them, but please do follow our good friends and network partners, the 1012 Network, on Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads. I think that's all the social media apps at TEN12 Network. Subscribe to the 1012 podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you put podcasts in your ears as well. I want to also give a quick mention for our Patreon too, patreon.com/SHPAWD cast. We just did a patron only hangout Monday night with some of our fantastic supporters, and I think we all had a great time. If you were there, you got some exclusive Cougar Talk stuff that may be a bit too spicy for the pod. Excited about some future patron-only weekly football content that'll be starting following week one of the football season as well. Watch that space if any or all of that sounds good to you, plus the thought of supporting our weekly independent Houston Cougar sports podcast. Please go to patreon.com/SHPAWDcast and support us for as little as 16 cents a day. Last but not least, I got to mention also our good sponsors and good friends, Charlie Hustle. If you haven't already, I would implore you to go to charliehustle.com. Check out their fantastic Houston Cougar collection of wearables, t-shirts, crew necks, and hoodies. I am wearing the red shirt with the Sailor Cougar and the State of Texas outline, not out of any sponsorship obligation, but because it's just that awesome of a design. And most importantly, is one of the absolute most comfortable shirts that I own. Just one of many awesome Cougar designs that Charlie Hustle released. And if you make the great decision to treat yourself to some gear from Charlie Hustle, or you're listening or watching this show, you could save 15% on your order just by using our promo code SHP15, SHP15. You still got a little time before the season opener against UTSA. Get some Charlie Hustle Cougar gear in your collection. Be looking good out there at the stadium this fall. And for the few of you non-Cougars listening, I know you all are out there just listening, get some intel, Cougar perspective for the season to come. Charlie Hustle has a ton of awesome recent Big 12 releases, BYU and UCF, I think most recently, but Texas Tech, TCU, and numerous others represented as well, top to bottom, amazing designs. And I will add really great folks who at the very top levels of the company have shown some real interest in putting out great Cougar gear here in the future. So that's our friends Charlie Hustle, charliehustle.com on the World Wide Web. Use that promo code SHP15 and get yourself some fantastic Cougar gear. Dustin, we have two big main topics we talked about a little bit in the introduction. They deserve a lot of time, so I will dilly-dally no more. We're going to talk here a little bit about the now completed trip by Cougar men's basketball to the land of Vegemite, Crocodile Dundee, the 1980s comedian Yahoo series, and numerous koalas and kangaroos. Of course, I'm talking about the great country of Australia, where the Cougs saw some cool sights, and I think for our perspective, gave us 4 exhibition games to pour over, and it's exhibition basketball. In one case, secret exhibition basketball, where the specific players in the opposing team were treated like some level of state secret, but I think we'll certainly make any reasonable excuse we can to talk about Cougar basketball. A cool trip for the guys, and I think kind of like the tour 4 years ago, I think serendipitous that this team that I think has the potential to be quite good, but has a number of new faces, got a chance to play some competitive basketball. So never a bad thing, is it, Dustin?
No, definitely. This is one of the things that we talked about in our patron hangout, but really like the opportunity that they got to do this season. You get to do it every 4 years, and kind of like you said, bringing in a lot of new guys, fitting in a lot of new pieces. I mean, Kelvin Sampson seems like he kind of does that every year, but this year maybe even a little bit more so. Replacing some key guys and bringing in some key pieces by the transfer portal. I'm excited to get these guys some minutes and some games to be playing together. And the Cougs end up going 3-1 in their 4 games in Australia. They had a 34-point loss to the Australian national team, which is actually the closest game that Houston had because they just absolutely blew the doors off of everybody else. Just, kind of what I was anticipating. I saw a quote from Kelvin Sampson before they left where, when they were still kind of hashing out who the 4 teams were going to be that they're going to play. And he said one of them was going to be the Australian national team. And he said, if it was up to me, I'd play all 4 against the Australian national team. And that's because, I think especially with this time of year, especially when you got a lot of guys playing together for the first time before the season has started, I think playing somebody that's better than you, you're going to learn a lot more about yourself than playing somebody that's just less talented, where you can just kind of overwhelm them with sheer talent. So, it's a good way to kind of stress test your team and figure out where you still need to improve and just kind of let them know that, oh, hey, there's still a ways to go. But definitely I think some exciting things to take from the tour. Emmanuel Sharp certainly being one of the breakout stars, which again, not terribly surprising. Someone that we learned last year what an incredibly talented scorer he is, and I figured he was likely to step into a bigger role this year. He started 3 of the 4 games, had one tough shooting performance, but was really good the other 3. And he's part of a real deep guard rotation that we saw the staff start 4 guards in 2 of the 4 games, and that's something that I'm really keeping an eye on heading into the season. You've just got so many damn guards. I mean, Jamal Shed, LJ Cryer, Damian Dunn, Emmanuel Sharp, Terrence Arsenault, Malik Wilson was showing some nice things over in Australia too. I don't know how you don't find some minutes for Ramon Walker Jr. as well. So, when you look at teams that have knocked out Houston in the tournament the last 3 years, Miami played 4 guards, Villanova played a lot of 4 guard, Baylor played 4 guards. So, I think one of the things we saw Kelvin Sampson doing was, and we saw a very little bit of it last year, where like Terrence Arsenault would, kind of be a small ball 4 in stretches. And I think that's something that we're going to see a lot more of this season. And I think that's one of the other reasons that Kelvin Sampson, was very fortunate to have this be the year that he could kind of do his international tour, was we saw them, the Cougs play a little bit more with 4 guards, something that I think we'll likely see more of, both because of, just the insane depth of guards they have on the roster, and also because maybe that's kind of what you want to do just to counter what the teams are doing nowadays.
Yeah, at the very least, you're going to see some 4 guard lines. If I had to guess, the opening night lineup, if everyone stays healthy, is going to have JVA and J1 in the front court. I think you're going to see a 3 guard starting lineup, but I think you're going to see a lot of, I don't think, with all respect to JVA Francis, I don't think we're going to be seeing 35 minutes of JVA Francis. So brings up the possibility, and I think also what's really intriguing is where are you going to get all those minutes for all those guys? It's a good problem to have. It's a champagne problem to have, but I think we had kind of taken as a foregone conclusion, the 2 of us, not to speak for you too much there, that it would be Dunn, Cryer, and Shed for that starting 3. And, you'd see a fair amount of Sharp and Arsenault, but I mean, God, Sharp on this tour was real good. You don't want to read too much into what is, a tour where 3 of the 4 teams you played are some, Australian all-star semi-pro team. And it's a weird extreme, like 3 opponents where you're like, yeah, but you probably should win this game by a bunch. And one where it's like, wow, we kept it within 34 against the FIBA number 3 team. Like that's pretty cool. I did want to shout out though, one individual performance. We're able to watch it on TV, obviously, so we can only say so much, but I think LJ Cryer getting 23 points and shooting better than 50% from the field against the Australian national team. It's got to be promising. A guy, I think his first game had a really good one too. A guy who, over the course of his college career, has definitely shown just no lack of ability as a scorer. And I think the Australian game is definitely evidence of that. And game by game, if you looked at Damian Dunn's box scores, you'd be like, well, he didn't shoot particularly well. But I saw some stuff that I think excites me, in that Damian Dunn's going to be a guy that even if he has an off shooting night, he could still get to the free throw line, still make a lot of those trips. I think that's going to be incredibly valuable. It's not something, for all the really good players we've seen from this program, really good guards, it's been a while, if ever, that we've had a guy who's really good at getting the free throw line, that it takes the sting out of a 2 for 10, 2 for 11, 2 for 12 kind of shooting night when you got a guy like Dunn who can get to the line, is going to make most of it. I think you saw that in Australia as well. But again, only can get so much of the 3 games against non-Australian national team opponents, and then against the Australian national team, one, you only know so much about it because the Australian national team, I'm sure, conditional to this game, made it like a state secret. I think they were willing to admit that Patty Mills, Josh Giddey, and Matthias Tybal suited up for them, but it was one of the funniest box scores I've seen, because you see like the Australian national, I mean, they have the team stats, but it's just blank. Like you have no idea who played for how long, what they did counting stat wise. You just get the team cumulative stats, which again, I get it. No incentive for them to give away as much as possible. It was just very funny to see it treated like a state secret. Like Kelvin Sampson said, testing yourself against a high level national team is incredibly valuable. And I think, and he said I think, like you said, if he could play all 4 games against them, he absolutely would have. So, really cool to see. Also, the guys got a chance to explore Australia. I won't go on that too much, but like, may not ever get a chance to do that again for a lot of these guys. See the Great Barrier Reef, see the Melbourne Zoo, all the cool stuff Australia has. So, cool trip. I think good on the timing, even though there's always some roster turnover in college basketball these days. I think this team going to the Big 12 this first season certainly didn't hurt to have this competitive trip, and I think certainly didn't tamp down our enthusiasm for the guard group on this team and for guys like Sharp and Arsenault and LJ Cryer and Damian Dunn as well. It cannot. I know football's coming up, I know volleyball's coming up, I know soccer's coming up. We're all varying degrees of excited about those, but it cannot be early November soon enough, and we actually see some real life Cougar basketball that counts for something.
Yeah, it is. I'm so excited about Cougar volleyball. I'm so excited about Cougar football. I'm intrigued by Cougar soccer, what they're going to do this offseason. So it is very easy for me to kind of focus on the fall sports, which we're about to do here for the rest of this episode. But every once in a while you just go, oh yeah, that's right. We're about to watch a really, really freaking good Houston team like play in the best conference in the country, and that's going to be awesome. And I'm very much looking forward to that.
Shout out Dane Roy also, who's in the crowd for the Frankston Blues Cougar men's basketball game, their 3rd game, I believe. Cool to see him wearing his Cougar letter jacket. We all miss D Roy being over there on the other side of the world.
For sure. Before we get on to the Cougar football season preview, did want to mention a bit of news that came out from that program since our last episode, which is that Houston officially put on the schedule. Excuse me. But the dinner is coming back up in a big way. But no, the Cougar football program added Oklahoma to the future schedule for both next year and 2028. The Cougars will be traveling up to Norman to face the Sooners in week 2 next year after hosting UNLV to open the season, and then getting a return trip from the Sooners in 2028, a game that, at least as of right now, is scheduled to take place at TD ECU Stadium. We all know these things can change, and that as much as we'd love to get that game on campus, often money talks in these situations. So we'll see how that goes, but at the very least, getting a 1-for-1 from the Sooners, which I think is obviously really exciting. You don't want to overschedule, I think, now that you're in a murderers row of a conference already, but I think it's still a good idea for fan engagement to try to at least get one name opponent on the non-conference schedule each year, and getting a 1-for-1 with a blue blood like Oklahoma is awesome. And Pesman said afterwards with the announcement, he said with Houston in the Big 12, you can expect to see more deals like this. And I think we will. I think a lot more schools are going to be willing to schedule home and homes with a Big 12 program than we're willing to do so with an AAC program, maybe.
And I would just add Oklahoma, a name team, like you said, whatever you think of the Sooners, that stadium and game day experience in Norman is really one of the best ones that college football has to offer. I don't know if I'm going to do the trip only 5 years after we did the last one there, but would absolutely recommend it if you're thinking of going up there and didn't go up for the 2019 Cougar trip there. Would love it if that 2028 game stayed on campus, but I will believe it's not going to be at NRG Stadium when I see the 2028 schedule with TDECU Stadium as the specific site. I know they said in the tweet it's going to be at TDCU, but obviously it's 5 years from now. A lot can change there, and if the money is right, there's a good chance whether you like it or not. And I'm very much in the not camp that U of H is going to try to get that thing in NRG, which I loved the atmosphere in 2016. I wouldn't trade the atmosphere of that game for anything, but I'm really, 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 really hoping that we somehow get that one on campus. I think the other intriguing thing with this topic is who gets added to the 2024 and 25 schedules. Theoretically, Boise State's on next year's schedule, but everyone who covers the team says that series isn't going to happen after all. 2025 is completely open. Yes, Boise is technically in the books for that, but there's no one scheduled for that. So I'm interested to see who goes there. Utah in 26 and 27 as well. Now that the Utes are joining the Big 12, you'd assume that changes. So probably not the last time this offseason that we will be this season or the coming offseason that we will be talking about Cougar scheduling shenanigans of some variety. I've seen some mention of maybe these teams can play a game as non-conference opponents or something like that. I don't know. I don't know the machinations of that, but would expect to see some games come here in the months and years to follow.
Yeah, I was disappointed to potentially lose the Boise series, because that was one that I was looking forward to. I thought it would have been a lot of fun. And for what it's worth, Boise State AD Jeremiah Dickey, who you may recognize his name because he was in Houston's athletics department from 2010 to 2017. He announced soon after So he announced right after, Duarte had it that Houston wasn't going to be coming to Boise State in 2024, but he did say that he was expecting Houston to come to play on the Smurf turf in the near future. So we'll see if that shakes out. And it kind of makes, and like I said, I'm sad to lose it, but it makes sense to change that one after you added the road game at OU, because U of H is getting 5 Big 12 home games out of 9 this year. So you figure that probably goes down to 4 next year. And with OU already being a non-conference road game, you don't want to only get 5 total home games for the season. That's not what your fans want to see for sure. So, I expect we'll see U of H look to fill that last spot for next year with the home game. I mean, I kind of expect they'll pick an FCS team. I know last fall Pesman said that kind of his ideal non-conference schedule once Houston joined the Big 12 would be 1 power conference team, 1 group of 5 team, and 1 FCS team. And in his recent mailbag, JD actually said that the Big 12 requires all schools to schedule that way, which I haven't seen elsewhere. I wonder if maybe that was like a misspeak. I always default to trusting JD, but that seems like requiring that seems kind of wild. So I'm not sure, especially given the difficulties that are inherent in football scheduling. So we'll see how that shakes out. But kind of like you mentioned, Sam, regardless, even if you're adding an FCS team every year, which is always kind of easier to do at the last second, Houston has some more schedule shuffling to do. They had the home and home with Colorado in 25 and 26. They had the home and home with Utah in 26 and 27. Like I said, maybe those become non-conference games, but more likely those are going away. Maybe we get the Boise game rescheduled, maybe not, maybe it gets canceled outright. We'll see what happens there. But like I said, 2025, nothing right now on this, especially assuming the Colorado and Boise games are gone. 26, only the roadie to Georgia Southern. 27, you have the LSU game at NRG and the return home game from Georgia Southern. And then funny enough, like the next year that Houston theoretically has its non-conference schedule all set is 2028. After they got a bunch of questions the next couple of years, but in 2028 they have theoretically the roadie to UNLV and home dates with Sam Houston and the return trip from the Sooners as well there. So a lot of things up in the air, it would seem. Will U of H have to cancel or reschedule even the 2028 games to get an FCS in? Will they be putting Rice back on the schedule again? Will we see any more conference realignment in the next couple of years that leads to other schools maybe scrambling to adjust or, add non-conference games? Will that open something up for the Cougs? Don't really have any solid answers, but, will kind of say, I hope the U of H manages to get Boise back on the schedule. Cause like I said, that seemed like that was going to be a fun one.
Yeah. Always. I mean, I think they've declined like a little bit, but always going to be at least a pretty good opponent. And the roadie to Boise, like the Smurf turf, like that's pretty cool. That's an iconic college football venue right there. Even if Boise is way out in the far Northwest, would very much like that to be a future roadie.
For sure. So getting into the more immediate future for Cougar football, we are previewing the Cougar football offense this episode. If you didn't hear last episode where we did the defense and the special teams, would encourage you to listen to that one as well. But we're going to go ahead and talk about the guys trying to score the points this time. And, kind of in terms of overall first blush thoughts, I think it's hard to know what to expect for basically every aspect of every Cougar sport this year, because they're all, heading into the Big 12 and whatnot. And we don't know what that means for each individual sport yet and how it's going to play out. But I think one of the cases where that's most of the case, where I'm most unsure, is talking about this Cougar football offense. It's an offense that's in transition in basically every meaningful sense, apart from the fact that Dan Holgorsen is still here. You're breaking in a new quarterback or quarterbacks, after losing an NFL talent in Clayton Tune. You lost an NFL talent to wide receiver in Tank Dell, the guy that you thought was going to be your primary running back this year after coming back from injury, hit the portal. Passing game coordinator and QB coach Shannon Dawson is gone, replaced by new QB's coach Mike Burchett. Offensive line coach and running game coordinator Brandon Jones is gone, replaced by Iman Agavi. Like everyone else, you're transitioning to a much tougher league. A league that, for as many jokes as people have historically made about Big 12 defenses, this has actually been a conference that's played a lot of pretty solid defense in recent years. So there are so many variables here. I'm really struggling with knowing where to kind of like draw the baseline expectation for the season. I think this could be a legitimately good offense. SP Plus projects this to be a top 25 offense. And if you've listened to the podcast for the last few years, we're fans of SP Plus, but breaking in a new quarterback with the offensive line always being a little iffy the last few years, I could see the wheels falling off, but I could see this being a borderline, disastrously bad offense. I think that's within the realm of possibility. And I feel like I'm maybe doing a lousy job of providing analysis. And I'm like, yeah, man, anything from like top 20 to like top 100 seems about right. But I don't know. It's not because I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about it. I'm just not sure how this is all going to shake out.
Yeah, you have all the questions that I think you pose. That the quarterback who started the majority of Dana Holgorsen's time here as head coach is now playing for the Arizona Cardinals, a functional 5-year starter in Clayton Tune, your best wide receiver the last 3 seasons, a guy who is certainly among the best to play the position for this program. Tank Dell is now at the Houston Texans. you have your offensive line mostly returning intact from last year, but you did lose a multi-year starter and another guy who started a fair amount last season to the portal, not to mention turning over nearly all or the vast majority of the offensive linemen who were backups last year. You mentioned the change of position coach as well. I think there are answers to all those questions potentially, but I'm also curious if the offense looks meaningfully different with last year's OC Shannon Dawson going to Miami, like you mentioned, and now none of your current on-field assistants even having the OC title. So you'd assume Dan Holgorsen will be calling his own plays in the coming season, which isn't the worst thing considering Holgorsen's track record as a play caller over his career is pretty good, though. It's fair to wonder if we're going to see something that doesn't largely resemble an offense that I think we would both agree spent too much of last season figuring out how to use personnel, how to use people that were, or players that were much more known quantities than a number of the guys we're going to talk about tonight. Again, acknowledging it's easy for me to sit here and say something effective. Why didn't they run the plays that work? I will say, like, the first half of
Sam, why didn't
the first half of last year does give me some pause. And I think the irony is this year's team, at least on paper, how we're going to talk about tonight, I think actually fits what the staff really seemed to be trying to square peg in a round hole last year. I think this can be a balanced, even potentially run first at times. Offense, you have an O-line coach who has a good track record there. You now have some more experience at running back. You have a quarterback who's shown an ability to use his legs effectively as a goal line and short yardage guy over his career, which I think complements what he has around him pretty well, in addition to a very talented receiver group. But again, is it a little bit of being gun shy after last year and seeing an offense that on the balance of the season was good, but spent, I think, more of the season that was acceptable figuring out how to use players who are very much known commodities, like I said at the top. I think that's my concern. But like you, I think this could be a top 25 offense. I think that SP plus prediction could be on the money. And then I could also see it taking a big step back from last year. I could see there being a situation where it's 2-7 and 2-8. You and I are on here talking about, like, do you give Lucas Coley a look at this point because you're not really playing for a bowl? You know, I could see that being a possibility. I don't think it's the most likely. I don't think it's the one I'm necessarily predicting, but it's not a crazy thought here in the preseason. So I think it might be maddening to hear us talk with uncertainty, but you really do have so many new faces. You have a completely different conference schedule. But again, I think it's a not hard or not laughable case to make that this could be a very good offense. I think I am more in that camp than I'm in the camp of this offense is going to take a step back from last year. But again, still way too early to say, still too much we don't know, but could be a good offense. That is a lot of me saying a lot of words to say a lot of the same things you said, that it could be great or could be very inconsistent.
Yeah, so I think that a lot of what goes into the offense is going to start with what we get from the offensive line, and that's where we're going to start with our positional previews as well. And I feel like being a U of H football fan for the last 10 seasons or so has kind of been a case study in how the most important position group on offense is probably not the quarterback, it's probably not the running backs or wide receivers, it's the offensive line. You don't see many teams with good offensive lines that aren't pretty good on offense. You don't see very many teams with bad offensive lines that aren't pretty bad on offense. It's a pretty direct correlation there most seasons with most teams. And occasionally maybe you have a Greg Ward Jr. who can can fairly consistently make something out of nothing while his line is constantly breaking down. But Greg Ward Jr.'s or Greg Ward's Jr. or Greg's Ward Jr., I don't know. You don't get too many guys like that. And while I have some optimism that our quarterbacks, who we'll talk about in a bit, will do, can do a good job, I feel comfortable saying that neither of those guys is Greg Ward, both in the literal sense and also in the, ability to escape pressure and create positive yards out of nothing sense. So, looking at the line, that there's definitely some guys I like on this line. There's some reasons for optimism with this line for sure. And when we had Dana Holgorsen on the podcast, he was, I think, surprisingly to both of us, effusive in his praise for the offensive line as someone who is, Dana not really gone out of his way to be, a sunshine pumper about position groups that didn't deserve it. But, I also kind of have to balance that with, I have some real questions about Houston's depth on the line. And this is a position maybe more so than any other where depth is paramount. So I think that's going to be tested and we're going to see. But, starting with the starters, when he had Dana on, he I guess kind of named the starting five. He said, yeah, we've got these five guys returning who are all, pretty quality starters. And Patrick Paul, likely to be the left tackle, Jack Freeman at center, Ruben Uniji at right tackle, and Tyler Johnson and Tank Jenkins at the guard positions. And, I think you certainly have to start with, Patrick Paul, who I love at left tackle. It's a great place to start building your line. He's officially a fifth-year junior, but I can't imagine that he'll be using that last year of college eligibility. In all likelihood, he'll be playing for paychecks a year from now in the NFL. And, he started every game in the last 2 seasons. And just, like I said, he's an NFL caliber guy. He's a, potential first, team all Big 12 kind of guy. And you love having someone like that at left tackle, especially with, a couple of less experienced quarterbacks than what you had a year ago.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to zoom out a bit. Something I'm really interested to see is the impact of Aaaand Nagavi. Someone we've mentioned a couple times in passing. Nagavi comes to the Cougars from Tulane, where he saw an offensive line that went from disastrously bad in 2021 to being one of the best run blocking groups in the country last year. Green Wave won the American title, rushed for over 200 yards per game, shocked USC as the G5 representative in the NY6 in the Cotton Bowl. And not a small part of that was the Green Wave offensive line getting to block for a bona fide future pro back in Tyjae Spears. But I think what excites me about Nagavi's resume is how often he's coached units over his career that ran the ball well. Before he was at Tulane, he was the O-line coach at Georgia State in 2021 when they were 8th nationally with 227 rush yards per game, had the best season in program history, went 6-2 in conference play, was an offensive assistant before that for 4 years at ULM, which ULM is a tough place to win, but did see some of the very best offense that program has seen since moving up to Division I FBS when he was on staff there. Also oversaw 2 different rushing attacks as alma mater McNeese that rushed for over 200 yards per game. Also a Houston area guy who played at Katy High. In one of his recent media availabilities, Holgorsen said that something effective, that he learned something every day about the run game from Nagavi. I think it's a high praise for a guy whose public image is very much being, an offensive mind, an offensive savant, or whatever you want to call Dana. And it's been 5 years since we have seen a consistently good rushing offense. Last year was 0 for 4, this offense being able to effectively run the football. And I think the biggest weakness of last year's offense is that, as much as we loved watching Clayton Tune and Tank Dell pitch the ball around the field, if that offense has an effective running game, I'm not saying that turns the bad defense of last year into a good one, but I think that makes that a much better, much more serious contender of a team. And an inability to run the ball that year and previous years, I think, big Achilles heel for this offense. And it would be really nice. It would make everyone's jobs a lot easier. It would make this offense a lot more effective if we finally had a group that could run block effectively. And I think the 2 guys at the top of my wish list, we talked about this when Cameron Johnson and others entered the transfer portal. I think the 2 guys, if you had told me, if you could hold on to 2 Cougar offensive linemen, who would it be? It would have been, and I'm not just saying that because they stayed, I'm not just saying that also because they were very generous with their time as guests of this show, Patrick Paul and Jack Freeman, because I think these specific challenges you have at left tackle, being the protector of the quarterback's blind side and naturally getting paired up against your opponent's best pass rusher, and Jack Freeman, everything you do to organize the offense. I think, like you say, when he came on with us, to be the guy that starts the play and all the specific challenges that come with being center, to have a really, really experienced guy like Jack there, I think that's really valuable. You saw some good stuff from Tyler Johnson last year. Once he got into the lineup, I think he graded out as one of your most effective offensive linemen. Super talented guy, was a national top 100 recruit out of Oak Ridge up in Conroe, started his career with the Longhorn program. I think that's a guy with a lot of talent who could be a really good offensive lineman, and now has had 2 full off seasons in the program, and that can only be to his benefit. Uniji, I think, very experienced guy in the program. I think the biggest question mark there, Tank Jenkins as well, has played a fair amount of this program, but what exactly can he be at this point? You do see on the offensive line, that is the position group, I would say, on both sides of the ball with the longest development period, that it takes some guys until their 4th, 5th, even in some cases 6th year to be a truly high level player. So not dismissing that possibility, but I am, it did catch my eye that Holgorsen has been as effusive as he has been about the offensive line with us, and I think any other time he's been in front of a microphone talking about this team. But it is fair to point out the questions. I like the new position coach. I like the generally positive vibes around it. Don't like the complete unknown. And there are some guys that have divisional experience behind the starters, but it gets a lot more murky once you get outside the expected starting 5.
Yeah, and I think even with the starting five, like you mentioned, there's, Uniji was battling turf toe last year. You need to see him healthy, and I think he's another guy who actually graded out pretty highly according to places like Pro Football Focus. But you want to see that healthy over the course of the year. And then Jenkins, someone who 3 years out of high school didn't play and then started all 14 games 2 years ago, and then was mostly a backup last year. I think he needs to show some improvement at the guard position as well. And then kind of like we mentioned, when you get to the depth. It's there's some question marks there. There's, in terms of guys that were on the roster last year, it's basically only one or two, depending on how you call it, that I would think we're really going to see too much of. Maybe I'd like to see some of Pancake Hunter this year, who was a really, really exciting recruit a year ago, the number 2 high school center in the country, according to Rivals. Didn't make any appearances last year. I'm really interested to see how much action the staff feels like he's ready for this year. And then Jalen Garth, who was a big time recruit for the Longhorns, transferred in once the season already started, so couldn't appear for the Cougs last year, but it looks like he'll be maybe the next in the Tank Jenkins, Tyler Johnson line to be a big time recruit, go to one of the big money schools in the state, not see too much of the field, and then bounce back to Houston, hopefully have some success. And then apart from those two guys, I think it's kind of what Dana 70 was talking to us as well. It makes sense that I think the rest of your depth is going to be the 4 FBS transfers that you brought in this cycle, Shamar Habdili, Peyton Dunn, Max Baines, and David Ndukwe. And, I don't want to speak ill of any of these guys because, I believe it's possible any or all of them could be, Big 12 offensive linemen, but I don't see the proof of that in their resumes thus far necessarily. Baines, in his second stint with the Cougs, started out at U of H out of high school, transferred to, I'm sorry, out of which high school was Max Baines from again, Sam?
St. Thomas High School, baby.
Oh, right. St. Thomas.
Your fight never dies.
He transferred to Akron, was now back. It was only kind of a rotational guy for the Zips. Shamar Habdili started last year for FIU, but it was, his first year starting in his 4th year with a pretty, lousy FIU program. Peyton Dunn transfers from UL Monroe, was a 2-year starter with the Warhawks. They went 4-8 both of those seasons. I didn't see him get any, all conference recognition or anything like that I can tell. And Ndukwe played very sparingly the last 3 seasons for, albeit a pretty solid Western Kentucky team. So, so kind of like I said, I think if the entire depth of this offensive line is able to shine through, not only because I feel like both of us think the starting 5 could be pretty good, but if we have a guy or two go down, and the next guys that are coming in, or even the guys that are just part of the rotation during the course of the game, if they're all playing to a high level, then I think whatever we're paying Aaaand Nagavi, we'll probably have to give him a raise.
Yeah, I don't expect to go completely healthy the entire season because really both line groups you're going to have a hard time keeping everyone healthy all the time. You're going to inevitably see some of the backups there, but I think if this season resembles last season in 2021 more in terms of guys being healthy, not that you have perfect health, but you have a number of your key guys stay healthy most of the season, I feel pretty good about that. But if it's like Holgerson's first 2 years, and I realize one of those years was the COVID year, so that's hard to say 2020 could be any kind of comp to anything other than that season. But if it's like the first 2 years when you really struggle to keep the same starting 5 healthy for any given time, I mean, that's not even a knock on Nagavi. I think it's just gonna make everyone's lives a lot harder. It's like having a car with a bad engine. Like, you might sometimes be able to make some things work, but ultimately something very key about something that you need to be functioning well for everything else to work, it's gonna really make your ceiling a lot lower than probably anyone would like it to be. And to get all those 3 of the 4 guys you mentioned, they have starts, but not necessarily for very good programs. And like you said, they weren't all conference performers of those schools, so you don't feel wild about the idea of those 3 guys starting a good chunk of the season, but were evaluated to be part of this group by this offensive line coach. So maybe Aaaand Nagavi, who knows a lot more about offensive line play and running the ball, sees something there that we don't. But if this group stays mostly healthy-ish, I feel pretty good. I feel pretty optimistic about the Cougars being able to have a pretty solid unit that's actually able to run the ball better than we've seen the last 4 years.
Yeah, and the guy that they'll be blocking for is, I guess, kind of officially not announced yet, but it feels like it's maybe the...
They're trying to play we don't know who's the starting quarterback. And I get why. Very, very much their prerogative to do so, like to the point where I think I even got to give away everything we did on our Patreon hangout, but I think my bold prediction was that we're going to have a Lucas Coley or Jonathan Smith starting week 1. That I expect as much smoke and mirrors as possible, but yeah, I think we both agree on that one. It's probably gonna be Donovan Smith.
I think so, but the one thing that, and as I was doing some research for this episode, doing my notes, I came across a quote from Dana from a while back, and he said something to the extent of like, we're getting them both ready to play because we expect that they will both have to play. And I think that is true. I think that's part of the reason why we say, oh, we're giving them 50-50 reps is, it's probably a minority of college football seasons. Do teams have, one quarterback who kind of takes all of the first team reps throughout the course of the season? Guys get hurt, guys struggle, and you maybe, want to give a different look, things like that happen, especially when you don't have one, for sure entrenched starter coming back from the previous season. That's just a thing that happens in college football, is you often need more than one quarterback. So I think it makes all the sense in the world to give both of them reps, and I think it's entirely possible and likely even that we'll see both of them get first team snaps throughout the course of the season. But like you said, I think we both expect that at the beginning of the season, it's going to be Donovan Smith, who transfers to Houston after being in the Texas Tech program the past 3 seasons, first redshirting and then making 21 appearances over the past 2 years. And certainly it's, he's got more of a resume than Coley, who has, I think 3 college passes to his name at this point. But it's certainly a mixed bag with Smith and his resume. There's a lot to like, a lot to be a little bit hesitant about. Completed over 66% of his passes last year, had 300 plus yard passing games against U of H, as you guys may remember, as well as UT Austin and Kansas State this past year. Was the primary quarterback in wins over the Cougars and the Longhorns. Had 300 plus yards in a win over Iowa State as a freshman the year before. So there have been some really impressive performances, and a lot of Texas Tech fans were definitely bummed out that it didn't work out with him in Lubbock. But like I said, mixed bag. His touchdown to interception ratio last year was 12-8, which is not what you want to see necessarily. And after he got dinged up, he wasn't able to win his starting job back last year. So I think he's 4th year in college now. So that's when you kind of want to see quarterbacks take the next step. And certainly that's what we're all hoping for from Donovan Smith. But it is, and again, this is not a knock on Donovan Smith, but when you go from someone who has, like 100 career touchdown passes or whatever it was that Clayton Tune ended up with, to a guy who, is not as much experience and not hasn't proven it as much. It's a little bit nerve wracking. And I think it's going to maybe take a little bit for Cougar fans to kind of reset their expectations and let Donovan Smith, be his own guy and figure out what his career trajectory is.
Yeah, the full range of performances are there for him. This is a guy who, again, not to bring up bad memories, but his first career start, threw for over 300 yards and rushed for a good amount against a real good Iowa State defense in 2021 to get the Red Raiders bowl eligible. This is also a guy who threw 3 picks against a Cougar secondary that was just absolutely allergic to intercepting the ball last year against anyone but Donovan Smith. I think it's a generalization, but if you want to make the optimist case for Donovan Smith, it was clear the big game performances are there for him. It was also clear last season he wasn't a great fit for the specific kind of air raid offense that throws the ball 45, 50 times a game, which I think Texas Tech generally wants to do with Zach Kittley. And it's good news, I think, for Cougar fans, because Holgerson's been very on the record of his desire not to really run that kind of offense anymore, to be a lot more balanced, maybe throw it kind of in that 25 to 35 times a game range, which you saw when he started the tail end of 2021 with Sonny Cumbie there as the interim coach. I'm very curious the kind of alternate history if Sonny Cumbie, because Joey McGuire said that Cumbie was coming on as the OC for the coming season, but he got hired as head coach at Louisiana Tech. So obviously going to take the head coaching job. I'm very curious if he's still at Texas Tech, if they don't make a change and the offense just looks like something that didn't exactly fit him. But I mean, even in an offense that didn't exactly fit him, still made some incredible game-winning plays against the Longhorns, against the Cougars in week 2 of last season. It's a guy who is not afraid of the moment, a guy who had some big wins. I watched a good chunk. It's still on YouTube out there of the 2021 Texas Tech Iowa State games. It's like, okay, it's one thing to read a box score. It's another thing to actually watch the guy play. And it definitely seemed like some combination of Iowa State finally seeing how this guy actually plays, because I mean, they had absolutely no film on the guy other than just occasional mop-up action before he went out there against the Cyclone. So the game did kind of catch up to him in the second half of that one, but you saw him make so many really good plays against an Iowa State defense that was really good at the college level and stocked with a number of future pros, guys like Will McDonald, who's a recent first-round pick, and Donovan Smith using his legs, very fearless, throwing some really nice balls. I think you might be getting a slight downgrade on the arm talent from Clayton Tune, but this is not a guy with a bad arm. And I would say not as explosive a runner as Clayton Tune, but a guy that I think you're going to be a lot more comfortable if you're in like a 3rd and 2, 3rd and 3 situation. Donovan Smith calls his own number at Donovan Smith's ability to get those tough yards. when he lost his job last year, he basically went back to being a short yardage goal line situational guy. And that would be just so wonderful. I mean, the run game has struggled broadly the last 4 seasons, but it would be so awesome to finally, for the first time in like 5 years, see us actually be good. And to be in a short yardage situation and not be like, I'm going to be so mad in 30 seconds when our running back or our quarterback gets tackled for a 3-yard loss because there were 3 or 4 defensive linemen like waiting in the backfield for another unsuccessful delayed draw. I think that'll make the Cougars a lot better there. And the likelihood Donovan Smith starts, I think this is going to be a lot better running team. How much better, I think, is the difference between this being a 4 or 5 win team or potentially comfortably on the right side of bowl eligibility. But he's a gamer. There are question marks, I think, from his 2-ish past years as a starter, but a guy who's certainly not afraid of the big moment, and a guy who I think fit the bill after the season, knowing Clayton Tune was leaving, that we were kind of generally looking for in a guy to compete for the starting quarterback job before we officially got Smith.
Yeah, and the guy he'll be competing with or has been competing with is Lucas Coley, signed with Arkansas originally out of high school, didn't appear for the Razorbacks through 3 passes as a backup for the Cougs last year, was a dual threat quarterback in high school, someone who's a little bit smaller than Smith, so maybe not the kind of power short yardage running, but maybe a little more escapability in the pocket type of deal. And he didn't start off last season as QB2 when the depth charts first came out, but he showed the staff enough to work up to that as the season went on. And Holgerson's been pretty clear, like I said, that they're both going to play, they're both going to need to play. So it's hard to know what to say about him when a guy when you've only seen 3 college passes from him. So not sure what to expect. I'm both in terms of Lucas Coley himself, and also, I think we're both, neither of us were too sad that Shannon Dawson is no longer the quarterback's coach here, but bringing someone in like, Mike Burchett, who's been an analyst, the last few years, has no FBS on-field coaching experience, only 1 year of FCS on-field coaching experience. It's not that inexperienced QBs or inexperienced QB coaches can't be successful, but it's not the most comfortable position to be in when, 10 of the 12 games on your schedule are against teams that are somewhere between pretty good and, really, really good.
Yeah, and no knock on Lucas Coley, who we didn't see a ton of last year. I think didn't get the normal backup quarterback reps because U of H didn't have an FCS bye game kind of opponent and just seemed bound and determined to make just about every game a nail biter, even the ones that we did not want to be nail biters. So naturally, not many opportunities for your QB2. Like you, I think it was definitely notable that on a roster with some more experienced backup quarterbacks that he was able to be the second string QB by the middle of the season. You could tell it was that South Florida game. I remember the staff was so desperate to get Coley like some kind of live game reps that they had Tune call timeout mid-drive, I remember, and brought in Coley. And I understand why, because at that point, it's like, all right, like we've mathematically or we've functionally put ourselves in a position not to blow this game in some weird, awful way, which they did, but that's not a normal thing. You don't normally see like mid-drive like that a quarterback get pulled, but I get it because there were so few other chances for Coley to see the field. He saw a cup of coffee out there when Tune went down with a stinger, I think it was against ECU, but just precious few opportunities for the guy to actually get on-field action. It's a shame because it really does seem like the video we've seen, the guy with a lot of arm talent, a guy I think is probably going to look a bit more like Tune in terms of his ability to move around in the pocket and also call his own number, and a guy with good arm. But it's hard when you're competing against a guy who spent a decent chunk of the last 2 years on the field in the conference that you're about to be in to win that job. I think it probably speaks positively of Coley that the staff didn't in early August be like, yeah, it's Donovan Smith, that they actually want to give him a chance to compete and actually think that this guy has something worth watching and something worth giving extended first team reps to.
Yeah, so moving to the running backs, this is a position group where the transfer portal was also involved this offseason. Unfortunately, kind of the major news was the transfer portal went the other way, as Alton McCaskill, of course, hit the portal and ended up at the University of Colorado. And that's a bummer. That's the recent Cougar football transfer that has bummed me out the most. Maybe even a little bit more than the De'Aaron King one did a few years back. That's someone who his freshman season, our running bit with him was every time he make a good play, would say Alton McCaskill, Big 12 running back, and now he probably is going to be a Big 12 running back, but for Colorado in a couple of years instead of for us this year. So I mean, that wouldn't, I'd be lying if I said that doesn't sting. And I think my kind of broad feeling on the running back group is kind of maybe the inverse of what I said about the line, in the sense that there's no one guy who I think you can say, oh yeah, he's an equal replacement for Alton McCaskill or anything like that. there's nobody else on this roster that's, I think, as good as him, assuming that, he returns to or improves on his 2021 form after his injury. But, the inverse to that is I love the depth that Houston has at this position. And that's true even after, the news that true freshman Rashawn Sanford, who had been getting some pretty rave reviews from the coaching staff, is out for the year with an injury. To me, even without Sanford, the Cougars have 4 guys that they're not even in the you could play him category. I think that they're in the you have to play him category. And all 4 of them have multiple years left, Sam, in Stacey Sneed, Tony Mathis Jr., Brandon Campbell, and Parker Jenkins.
And I think I said when the transfer became public knowledge, there's no scenario where Aaaand McCaskill leaving makes your running back room better. It doesn't have an adverse effect. But that doesn't mean there isn't still a potentially exciting group of guys here, even now, without that guy that we expected to be the headline back going into this past offseason. Returning guys, Stacey Sneed and Brandon Campbell, I think last year both showed enough promise to feel like they could both develop into something later in their careers. But also, I think at times both looked like guys getting their first extended Division I reps. Campbell had 134 total yards against Tech in week 2, had a 40-yard touchdown early against Kansas, but never really looked fully healthy the last couple of months of the season. Sneed definitely took advantage of Campbell and the now graduated Tajon Henry getting dinged up in the middle of the year. Had that 100-yard game against Navy, combined 274 rush yards and 5 touchdowns in the USF, SMU, and Temple games. That Temple game in particular, really standout performance, averaged 13 yards a carry. Just unfortunately got a concussion at the end of that one, largely sidelined him for the rest of the season. Just made a cameo appearance versus Tulsa in the bowl against ULA. But I think that most important addition of the offseason is Tony Mathis, who you alluded to, someone I don't expect to be a star player. Wasn't even my prediction to lead the team in rush yards when we did our bold predictions thing a couple episodes ago, but comes in with 2 remaining years of eligibility, was recruited by the staff of West Virginia, but never played for them, started his career in 2019, the Holgerson, and some of his assistants came over here. His numbers from West Virginia don't scream out at you, but again, unlike basically every Cougar player we're going to talk about tonight, besides Donovan Smith, you actually have a good sample size of what Tony Mathis can do at the Big 12 level. He gives you a proven veteran presence that I would say, minus Aaaand McCaskill, maybe this unit was a bit light on. Do I expect him to be the best running back by far? No, honestly, I think my pick was Stacey Sneed for leading rusher in this team, and I think I feel pretty comfortable with that pick. But even if he gives you exactly what he gave you West Virginia, assuming no improvement, which I don't think it's fair. I mean, he's in his 5th collegiate season, so we could be talking about a guy who takes a big step forward because physical maturity at that age, like being 23 versus 22, can actually have a big difference at the college level. But even if he just gives you what he gave you at West Virginia, I still think that's a strong net positive for your offense, and it just gives you a reliable guy who can get tough yards between the tackles, and then maybe you get something a bit more explosive out of Sneed, Campbell, or even freshman Parker Jenkins, who I've seen alluded to as a guy to watch, who's had a really nice fall camp.
Yeah, Mathis Jr., I mean, like I said, he's not maybe Aaand McCaskill in terms of his overall, I think, ceiling or whatever, but he was the leading rusher for a Big 12 program last year, and that's not insignificant to bring a guy like that in. And I think maybe profiles like a little bit of a more between the tackles guy compared to someone like Sneed. Mathis hasn't caught a ton of passes, has decent size at 5'11", 208. But Sneed's someone, that was really kind of one of the pleasant surprises last year, and kind of like you mentioned, it didn't look fully ready yet, but he's a 4th-year sophomore this coming year after he didn't see any action in 2020 or 2021, and then kind of went from not appearing at all really to rushing for 501 yards, tops among U of H running backs on just 76 attempts last year. It was better than 6.5 yards per carry. I had some nice versatility too. Caught 22 passes out of the backfield. Was graded out pretty well as a run blocker according to PFF, despite not being the biggest body guy, kind of like I mentioned. So you have him, you have Mathis, you have Brandon Campbell to join from USC. Saw some minimal action as a true freshman for the Trojans, and then last year led the Cougs in rush attempts with 90, averaged nearly 5 yards a carry, and still young, still 3 years of eligibility left. And, I think for a 2nd-year collegiate who sat out his senior season of high school due to COVID, he showed enough last year, that I'm excited to have him back and see what his career trajectory is over the next couple seasons. He had off-season shoulder surgery, so hopefully he's back to 100% physically by the time the season gets going. And then, like you mentioned, Parker Jenkins, man, true freshman out of Klein Forest, was a 4-star recruit who could have gone a ton of places for college, but chose to stay home. Running back coach Mike Jenks said this week, quote, Parker is going to play. I can tell you that right now, end quote. So I like the sound of that. I like the look of some of the fall highlights that have gotten posted on social media from the Cougar football program. You've seen some really nice plays by Parker Jenkins that have gotten posted in those highlight packages. So, yeah, as a true freshman, really, really excited to see what he has to offer. And like I said, I think this is, potentially a 4-man stable that you're gonna kind of have to find reps for all 4 of these guys, because I don't know, who these guys would you not play this year.
Yeah, just love the depth of this group. You got to have multiple different makers at this position. You're not going to be able to be a team with a bell cow 35, 40 carries a game kind of back. That's just not something that most anybody does anymore. And you have a number of guys. We've talked about 4 guys that very conceivably could get multiple carries week 1 against UTSA. And again, is that your guy stepping up? Is that Tony Mathis proving he's better than the last 2 years, which were solid but unspectacular? I would say West Virginia. Do you have one or both of Brandon Campbell or Stacey Sneed stepping up, as well as Parker Jenkins, a freshman phenom who's ready to be a meaningful contributor to you from week 1? I think it's exciting. And I think a lot does hinge on the group we talked about previously, the offensive line and how much they're kicking ass and taking names in the running game. But let's say this offensive line is some degree of good run blocking unit. I certainly don't think this running back group is going to hold them back or prevent this from being a good rushing offense if we're getting, the support from the offensive line. You need to be a good rushing offense.
And speaking of positions that I love the depth of, Sam, we're going to talk about the wide receivers next. And I think this is the offensive position group that I'm the highest on. And I say that even with the departure of your 2 top receivers from last year in Tank Dell and Keshawn Carter. And you can say that there's no Tank Dell level talent in the wide receiver room this year, and that's probably accurate. I mean, Tank Dell was essentially an NFL receiver playing college ball last year. But like I said, yeah, love the depth here too. And I think there is maybe even a little bit more than the running back group, some top line talent that is really, really good. Houston has multiple guys that I'm excited about. All 3 ways that you can bring players in: returning players, freshman players, transfers. There are multiple guys in all 3 of those categories that I am, pretty excited about. And I think you got to start with the returners, and you got to start with Matthew Golden, who came in with a ton of hype as a true freshman last year and lived up to it in a big way. Caught 38 passes for 584 yards and 7 scores. Athlon and Phil Steele have him on their, preseason all Big 12 first and second teams respectively. And, I think he'll be asked to do a little bit more this year with a year of experience under his belt. And like I said, no Tank Dell around to be the guy. And I am just really excited to see what he does taking on a bigger role. And I think maybe the best thing, Sam, that I can say about Matthew Golden is that Dana Holgorsen compared him favorably to Alton McCaskill going into last year. And looking back, you have to go, yeah, that was a fair comparison. He lived up to that for sure.
Yeah, was just behind Keshawn Carter on last year's team for leading the team in yards per reception, finished with a very respectable, for a true freshman, 15.4 reception yard average, led the non-Tank Dell Cougar receivers in touchdowns as well. Has to now become the alpha of this group, like Holgorsen said when he came on with us. But even as a second-year college player who still has a lot to prove at this level, I think it's a pretty safe bet when it's all said and done that he becomes yet another really good receiver to come through this program. And I get why U of H didn't have a presence on the all Big 12 preseason team, but I think Golden will be there in about 4 months on a postseason team when it's all said and done. A really exciting guy, a guy who lived up to every bit of the recruiting hype as well. And I would say, to zoom out, fully agree with everything you said at the top. I think long-term, this is your most exciting position group by a good margin. I think even short-term, you can make a good argument for it as well. Still very young, but I think without a doubt, the most talented position group you have, offense or defense, on this team. A lot of depth, guys with college experience and guys with the recruiting pedigree as well. Still fairly young, so maybe a little bit lighter on the experience as opposed to the pedigree, but also got to mention Golden's fellow sophomore, Samuel Brown, returns after a season where he had 3 more receptions than Golden. Really seemed to find his role in this offense after Joseph Manjack went down hurt against Rice, had 100+ yards against Memphis, made some critical catches, Sam Brown did in that crazy Cougar comeback, had multi-touchdown receiving games against USF and SMU. And my anecdotal impression was that kind of in that late middle part of the season, Brown really became a reliable move the sticks kind of target. A tad bit less explosive, certainly, than Golden, but you need that in your offense. Like, not every guy is going to be Matthew Golden. You need some guys who are big targets who can reliably get you 8 to 12 yards as you move the ball down the field. Not everything can be explosive plays. You got to have some guys who can move the sticks. But unfortunately, Brown's problems really weren't the football last year. He got into a fight with Manjack on the sidelines, the Kansas game that went viral. Unfortunately, was caught on camera slapping a Tulsa player after the regular season finale, got suspended for the Independence Bowl as a result there. But I was impressed with what I saw from him last year when he was in the field. If you can avoid kind of the off-field gaps, I mean, you're talking about a good starting receiver, and would really like to see a full season of a healthy Joseph Manjack. He's got a lot of really positive reviews from fall camp. 15 receptions last year, only had 1 touchdown, but you weight that a little heavier when that 1 touchdown is the Sports Center #1 play off of week 1 of the college football season. And it's tantalizing what you saw of him last year in only several games. The guy who's a big target who has the occasional spectacular catch in his bag. I think we'd all like to see him get a fully healthy season. And like I said, seems to be getting a lot of the positive reviews from the people who are actually at fall camp. And you alluded to it, those transfers, Dustin. Really excited to see what we're going to get out of Stephon Johnson from Oklahoma State and Joshua Cobbs from Wyoming. I'm going to highlight Johnson specifically, a guy who's originally from Houston, played 10 games last year as a true freshman at Oklahoma State, had Oklahoma State's longest reception of the 2022 season, an 84-yard touchdown in their guaranteed rate bowl loss to Wisconsin, had 17 receptions for the year, not a ton, but had a healthy over 17 yards per reception. This isn't a situation where he's leaving an established Big 12 program for more reps here. He's actually probably leaving a situation where he had an easier path to being one of Oklahoma State's top receivers than he does with the Cougars, because most of Oklahoma State's receiver group either graduated or transferred out after last season. Would have had a pretty clear path to starting on this coming season's team, which I think is a nice endorsement of the Cougar program.
Yeah, like Johnson a lot. Like I said, made 10 appearances for Oklahoma State as a true freshman. Part of, kind of what was like kind of a mass exodus of players there from it in Stillwater, and many of whom were, I think, very much like you said, in the long-term plans there. Anytime you can get someone from a program like Oklahoma State, where it's not just a guy that, got recruited over or, got lost in the depth chart or whatever. This is the guy they wanted back, who would have, like you said, most likely had an easier time starting there maybe than he's going to have in Houston. So I think that's a really good add. I wanted to circle back to Joseph Manjack the fourth, though, someone who I think if he stays healthy last year, he's coming into this year with way more hype than he is. He was talented enough that USC put him on the field for 11 games as a true freshman. You mentioned the crazy play he made against UTSA and, got the waiver. So I think kind of, if you're going to get injured, he got to get the bull waiver and got to play the 5 years and still, or got to play the 5 games, I should say, and still keep the red shirt for the year. So has 3 years of eligibility left. And that's someone who I think can be a good Big 12 receiver already this year. So for having him for potentially 3 years of eligibility is really exciting. And then you mentioned the other transfer as well, Joshua Cobbs. Spent the past 3 years at Wyoming, first took a red shirt, then appeared in nearly every game the past 2 seasons. And the numbers don't jump way off the page at you. 245 receiving yards in 2021, 407 receiving yards last year, just 3 touchdowns over those 2 seasons. But the 407 receiving yards last year actually led the team. He was on a Wyoming team that throws it less than pretty much anybody else in the country outside of the service academies. He was still able to put up some pretty decent yardage numbers as an underclassman there. And then, you got the 3 returning guys, the 2 transfers. Do you think that's a lot of depth? Certainly, you're not expecting the freshmen to come in and make a big impact.
Not so fast, my friend.
You've got not 1, but 2 true freshmen that I think you have to get on the field this season, in Michael Harrison Pilot and, of course, Jonah Wilson. Michael Harrison Pilot, the crown jewel of the recruiting class from Temple, Texas. Just recruited, picked Houston over TCU as his other finalist, had offers from pretty much everybody. The only higher rated recruits out of high school who have ever come straight to Houston and played for the Cougs were Ed Oliver and Deontay Greenberry, 2 guys that, went on to play in the pros. So it's a pretty good track record there. And then, I think if it wasn't for Michael Harrison Pilot, we'd be talking way more than we have about Jonah Wilson, a guy who decommitted from the Burnt Orange School in Austin to join the Cougs, chose UT Austin over just another, like Harrison Pilot, a crazy laundry list of A-list offers. And this is my fun random fact. It has nothing to do with anything. It has nothing to do with how good UH is going to be in football this year. But while I was researching some stuff and poking around on Twitter today, I found this one UT Austin fan account where this guy's just like his thing, this hill that he's going to die on is that Jonah Wilson was begging to recommit to the youth school in Austin, but Sark just wouldn't have him. It was very entertaining and amusing. I got a good laugh out of it today. But just in terms of, these were your 2 highest rated recruits in the class, 2 guys that could have gone just about anywhere and chose to come play in the Scarlet and Albino. So it's not going to be easy to find, especially if we have an offense that kind of like we expect is going to be close to 50-50. It's not going to be some, air raid, offense, Case Keenum era offense when you got, 2 or 3,000 yard receivers or anything like that. But yeah, I think you really have to right away find some reps and get Michael Harrison Pilot and Jonah Wilson both on the field.
Yeah, I would say agree with you about all that. A couple of guys I want to watch long term. I don't know if they're going to break into this group this year, but CJ Nelson, who the Cougs flipped in the 2022 cycle from SMU, pretty good recruit who got kind of overshadowed by Matthew Golden committing there as well. I'm curious to see what he does long term. And Jacoby Banks, who was in this class, again at the risk of getting overshadowed by two very, very well inside the 4-star rating receivers, the two caliber receivers that maybe U of H has not gotten out of the high school ranks previously. I'm very curious to see what Nelson and Banks are able to do long term as well, though wouldn't expect to see a ton of reps from either of those two guys in meaningful game action in 2023. Probably should talk about the tight ends here at least a little bit, though I don't know if we'll see a ton of them involved in the pass game. The Cougs do lose a 4-year starter in Christian Trahan, though we never saw him become a really regular, consistent presence in the passing game. I do expect the tight end reps to go to some combination of returner Matt Burns, who had a touchdown reception last year against Navy, and 6th-year super senior Michael Laughlin, who grad transferred in from West Virginia. Laughlin had 37 receptions in 32 games at West Virginia, a number that certainly would have been higher if he had had not one, not two, but 3 different season-ending knee injuries in his 5 years in Morgantown. Actually played in 28, or I don't think he played, but was on the roster in 2018, actually for Holgerson's last year. There's at least some familiarity between him. I think he actually retired sometime early this year and then decided to give it one more go and play for the Cougars. If he can stay mostly healthy this year, I think it'll give you a nice veteran presence and somebody who comes in with some familiarity with what the staff does here. But like I said, don't expect to see a ton of the tight ends involved in the pass game.
Yeah, you took most of my notes there for the tight ends. I expect O'Laughlin and Burns to be kind of the two guys that get most of the reps there. But yeah, after Christian Trahan's Cougar career came and went without a 400-yard season, with only one 300-yard season, I kind of have disabused myself of the notion that we're ever going to see the tight end be a large part of the passing game under Dana Holgorsen. I'm not sure that that's necessary. We just talked about how insanely deep the receiver group is this year. I'm not sure you need to go digging in the tight ends to find more guys that you want to get a lot of targets to. So yeah, I think we'll probably see more of them being asked of them in maybe the blocking game and in the occasional pass here and there.
Yeah, if they're positive in blocking in, you get 2 to 3, kind of catching the defense off guard plays per game from that group. I think you call that a net win.
All right, Sam, I think that's all the Cougar football offense. Ready to go from Cougar football to Cougar football?
Let's talk some football.
All right, so Cougar soccer. We are now, it's 8:35, so we're almost there, Sam. We're so close to 24 hours from Cougar soccer kicking off the season. And we do want to kind of do a season preview here for the Cougs, and just the quick potted history for Cougar soccer is that the Cougs have never really figured out how to be successful in soccer. They've never been to the NCAA tournament. And before previous head coach Diego Bocanegra took over, they were, I think it's fair to say, a dumpster fire. I don't say that lightly, but I think it was probably fair in this instance. But, Bocanegra got them respectable in 2021, had a team that deserved to grab that first ever NCAA bid. We'll die on that hill, but sadly they were left out. But Bocanegra retired from college coaching abruptly in January after the season. And then last year, things were a struggle for first-year head coach Jaime Frias. And in his defense, he was kind of hired a little bit later in the cycle than is really ideal. So he didn't have a full offseason to recruit. And there were some key players that graduated, but the cupboard certainly wasn't bare in terms of returning talent. And Houston struggled mightily. They won just 6 of their 16 games overall. They had just 2 wins in 8 AAC games after nearly winning a regular season conference title the year before. So heading into this season, Frias did have an entire offseason to recruit. And he made the most of it. He was aggressive in the portal. He brought in a bunch of potential difference makers. And, I think I've said this before in the offseason, but I don't think there's any Cougar program that did more in the offseason to change my overall opinion of the program for the better than Cougar soccer in terms of the talent that they brought in. And, we're still talking about a team that went 2-4-2 in the American last year, suddenly moving to, say it with me, a much tougher conference. But, I am intrigued to see what this program does. Coach Frias did a very interesting interview with Houston City soccer legend Glenn Davis recently, talking a lot about a lot of things, including trying to kind of the new philosophy that he's trying to implement compared to what Houston was doing before. And it sounded like he felt like this current team that he had is a much better fit and felt much more confident than what he had last year. So we'll see. Neither of us really saw last year as a year zero candidate, I don't think, because Cougar soccer was coming off of its best season in program history, but I think it ends up being a year zero in a lot of ways anyway, in terms of being, year one of a new coach, year one of trying to implement a new system, year one in the American before you move on to a new conference, kind of restart in the Big 12. So, I think with the point, Sam, where I'm kind of willing to give Jaime Frias a second chance at a first impression.
Would agree. And we are talking about a team that lost its leading goal scorer, lost 5 of its top 6 minutes leaders from the 2022 season, which is noteworthy. But I think kind of like we talked about in last week's football defense preview, you don't necessarily need to wait returning production the same if it's coming off of a team or a unit that maybe didn't do so great the previous season, but is going to be a big challenge, like you said, to go from being in the American, which is a solid soccer conference, but was certainly not as good as the league you're about to go in this coming season, a team that won 2 American games last season, to playing a Big 12 schedule. Though I thought the staff did a really good job. Like you, I was really impressed. I think generally, knowing who we brought in, I was like, they seem like they brought in a lot of talent at different levels. And once I actually dived in for the preview, I was just like, oh man, we're going to be starting about like 65-70% players who weren't here last year, which I think it's probably necessary when, right or wrong, just last year's team didn't seem to fit exactly what this head coach and the staff wanted to do. Obviously, open question whether what this head coach and staff wants to do will work here long term, but I think undebatable it didn't work so great last year. And I don't think you can point to one specific area and say X is why last year's team struggled, or this is why last year's team took a step back from 2021. But I would say doubling your average goals allowed is not something that helped. Probably a good indicator that something was not clicking there. And you have last year's starter transferring to Iowa State in the offseason, so the Cougars should get 2021 starter Mika Gracia back after she missed all of last season. Gracia, if you'll recall, had 9 clean sheets during that awesome fall 2021 season, including ones over top 25 conference opponents, UCF, Memphis, and SMU. And you don't have any other goalkeeper on this roster who has D1 experience, though you do have Olivia Dietrich join the program after spending her freshman season at Texas Tech. So I think a safe but not ironclad assumption that Gracia is back being your 2023 starter if healthy. And I think that's exciting. She was quite good her first full season as a starter in the fall of 2021. And if you get something like that Mika Gracia back, I think you start things if you have a reliable goalkeeper and experienced goalkeeper. I think Gracia gives you both of that. And I'm excited about what's in front of her as well. I think Frias said it in that interview with Glenn Davis that he made it sound like your center defenders directly in front of Gracia are going to be 2 transfers, Jay Gibson from Georgia and Sophia Weber from UConn, I believe were the 2 he said. You're making a face. Did I misremember?
No, I'm just making a face because you didn't even let me talk about the goalkeepers before you moved on to the defenders, Sam. Buddy. Come on. No. I'm really.
I was gonna say, like, obviously, if you don't have those 2 in front of it, I think you don't feel nearly as good. But I think that those 3 right there, that's the spine of your team. I think you could feel pretty optimistic about those 3.
No, for sure. I think that's fair. And, Mika Gracia, kind of like you mentioned, was really impressive in the net for Houston a couple of years ago. I guess, was she for sure injured last year? I was never really clear why.
I just said she missed last year. I didn't see any kind of explanation.
Yeah, for reasons that are not entirely clear to me, didn't appear last year after a really impressive 2021 season. And honestly, I kind of expected Gracia to hit the portal maybe this offseason. But instead it was, like you mentioned, last year's starter Haley Woodward, who transferred to Iowa State, and Gracia is back. And yeah, for whatever reason she missed last year, I don't know. But if she's back to her 2021 form, that's really exciting because she was really, really impressive. And kind of like you mentioned, 2 of the ladies, I should say, that the coach Frias mentioned in his interview with Glenn Davis are his what sounds like will be his starting center backs. Part of the foundation of the defense in transfers, Jada Gibson and Sophia Weber. Gibson made 18 appearances and 7 starts last year as a true freshman for a kind of top 25-ish Georgia team. Weber started most of the past 2 seasons for a pretty respectable UConn team. So I think a couple of really exciting pieces that are going to, hopefully make this a significantly less leaky defense than what we saw last year. And then Frias also in the interview sounded really excited about Alex Whitcraft as an attacking outside back as part of the defensive line as well. She started all 16 games last year as a true freshman, was named to the AAC all-rookie team. And, there's some other experience on the back line as well. Anna Reyes appeared in every game last year after showing some exciting flashes as a true freshman in 2021. Ava Alanis was a regular rotation player for Boca Negra's last 2 seasons, only made a couple of appearances last year, but, didn't transfer, which might suggest that she and the staff still kind of see a role for her in this program. And then, Weber and Gibson, not the only transfers on the defensive line that are interesting as well, because Haley Stodden also comes in, spent 2 years each at Utah and Colorado. She comes to Houston as a 5th-year player with 58 collegiate appearances under her belt. You love having that experience on the back line. Kaylee Dressback, another player who's seen some action with Houston the last couple of years. So really like what potentially has Houston, what potentially Houston has on the back line there. And I think there's a lot of pieces there that are exciting and reason to believe that Houston can do a lot better defensively than the rather uninspired defensive efforts that we saw last year.
Yeah, Whitcraft had one of the highlights of last season. Had multiple assists on the year, including one-on-one ended up being the game-winning goal against UTSA. Leads all returners in minutes played as well. Like you said, Frias mentioned her, irrespective of position group, as a really exciting player to watch, and that she was as effective as she was last year in her first season against Division I competition, I think can only be a good thing long-term and an exciting thing long-term. And it sounded like in front of them in the midfield that Frias had a starting trio that he had settled on, CC Cross, Caitlin Matthews, and Alex Folks, as the players will likely expect to see the most of, though you don't expect to see 90 minutes of midfielders. Expect to probably see 50 to 60 minutes of this group. But Cross is an exciting player. She started 14 matches last season, had one of the plays of the entire Cougar athletics year. That insane goal from distance in the win over Rice, was a critical bench player the season before that fall 2021 team. Definitely a player who over her career has flashed some creative ability. Matthews had the second most minutes of all returnees, scored 2 goals last season, started 19 of 20 matches last year. And the newcomer in that group, Folks, played the past 2 seasons at Texas Tech, played in 12 matches last season for a Red Raider squad that didn't go to the NCAA tournament, but only lost once in Big 12 play. A homecoming for her. She played for the Houston Dashes development team as well. A couple other transfer midfielders worth noting as well. Bree Hilsentegger from Pitt and Juliet Moore from Mississippi State, who were both transferring back to their home state and who both played a fair amount in some solid power conference teams already. So obviously nice to have the talent and the defensive spine that we just talked about, but good to also have a trio of experienced, potentially creative players kind of bridging the area between your attack and your defense.
Yeah, Caitlin Matthews is one of those players who I just, I want to see the program have a good year, broadly speaking, but I also really want that for her as someone in her 4th year in the program now. Was a huge part of kind of building things up under Coach Bocanegra, and then obviously was a huge minutes player, like you mentioned, in the disappointing year last year. Would love to see her be part of a bounce back season for the Cougs this year. And then, CC Cross going from being kind of the impact sub to being, a starter who, I think still has some more growth. It's her 4th year as a collegiate as well, 3rd with the Cougars. I think another player is going to be a big part of the puzzle. And Frias called her, Matthews and Folks, all very cerebral midfielders. And like you, I think more in Hilson Tigers, even though, Frias didn't mention them, they both, got on the field a fair amount the last couple of years. They spent 2 seasons each at Mississippi State and Pitt, respectively. Those are both really good programs that were like in or right around the top 25 last year. So, excuse me. They get a couple of those rotation players for the Cougs. I think gives you some, 5 players in the midfield that all likely are going to be part of that rotation, which is good because, like you said, it's more so than I think you can have 2 center backs and have them play the majority of the game, but in college especially, you're probably going to rotate those midfielders a good amount. And I like the depth that Houston has there, and I like the depth that they have up front as well. They've got a really intriguing striker group that's especially made up of the transfers. Ramsey Davis joins Houston as a transfer from Ole Miss. She spent 3 seasons there, made 39 starts, scored 7 goals, including an NCAA tournament goal. Cameron Maddox, was a freshman for a bad San Diego team last year, but led them in scoring with 3 goals. Really excited to have her in the program for potentially the next 3 seasons. And then Allie Bird, another really intriguing transfer up front, was named to an all-conference USA team each of the past 4 seasons with North Texas. And then I think the one returner that I'm most hopeful for is Nadia Kamasa, who was a really pleasant surprise 2 years ago. As a freshman, didn't really play much, but then came on and led the Cougs with 6 goals a couple of years ago. Didn't have as much success this past season. Saw her scoring dip to 3 goals. But we certainly know that the ability is there. And I think between those 4, that gives Houston a lot of options up front and a lot of options for Coach Frias to kind of figure out who's going to be his leading scorers this year.
Yeah, Bird and Maddox both come in, I think, coming off good seasons last year. I know Maddox wasn't on a particularly good team, but was a good recruit out of high school. Played a fair amount, knows for a bad team, but I will also say the West Coast Conference is probably comparable to what the returning players who played in the American dealt with last year. So not any bigger step up in terms of competition for Maddox and Bird than I would say the majority of the Cougars that played last year's schedule. And I was surprised because Frias mentioned Bird and Maddox specifically when we talked about the forward group. And again, no, it was a limited interview. I know we didn't have time to talk about every single player, and the question wasn't asking for every single player to ask him to name some players. So I'll give him a little benefit out there. But the more I looked into the first player you mentioned, Ramsey Davis's resume, the more I was just like, why didn't he mention her? Because it was.
He did. I thought you said Davis and Maddox. I could be wrong.
Yeah, probably am. Probably my hearing is a really bad standard despite being under 40 here. But yeah, like you said, 7 goals and 7 assists for an Ole Miss program that went to the NCAA tournament 2 of the 3 years she was there. I think real impressive there. And Nadia Kamasa is somebody who I think has been one of our favorite players from the past 2 seasons. One of those players that, whether she's scoring the goal or not, that when she is on the field makes things happen up front, makes chaos happen up front, but the good kind of chaos, whether that's closing down a opposing goalkeeper for a crazy deflection goal like she did against Memphis. That was her against Memphis, right? 2 years ago. I'm not misremembering. If you were going to be like, Sam, that was Jasmine Grant, I was going to die of embarrassment as a big Cougar soccer knower. But somebody who can make things happen in front of an opponent's goal, which sounds simple, but somebody I think we hope to see plenty of in addition to all the other forwards that we've mentioned. I think that's something that's really stood out to me. Really, all the position groups we've talked about tonight, that you could talk yourself into a fair amount of depth. That obviously you have a number of transfer impact players, but you have that nice mix of impact players that are returning, impact players coming in, that you're not like just hypothetically Ramsey Davis getting hurt away from not having any proven strikers, that you have 3 to 5 strikers that you feel pretty decent about, 3 to 5 midfielders you feel pretty decent about. So I think that's a good place to be. And I think it's why you could talk yourself into maybe being a bit more optimistic about this team, despite not having the greatest 2022.
Yeah, no, I do like that this team feels like they have some high level talent, but also they don't feel like there's any one player that can get injured that's going to completely derail their season. So I think that's a good place to be. In terms of what your expectations are for the season, I think just being in the top 10 in the Big 12 would be a good place to start. That's where Houston was picked in the preseason poll, and they got picked ahead of a couple of teams that beat them last year in Cincinnati and Baylor. So, just even doing that, I think is going to be an accomplishment of some sort. And I believe Frias said in the Davis interview that it's the top 10 that make the Big 12 tournament. So that's, you certainly don't want to get left out of your conference tournament when ultimately making the NCAA tournament is kind of your stretch goal. And I think that would be an optimistic goal for the Cougars this year, given what last year was. But, Frias did kind of mention it. He says, hey, that's the goal, is, the next goal is making the NCAA tournament. So, and I think if you're in the top 10, the top 8 or so of the Big 12, that puts you not too far off from that kind of, goal. So I think in terms of what your goals are for the season, I think that's kind of where you go. Hey, can we be in the top 10 in the Big 12? Can we maybe even outperform the preseason, top 10 pick in the Big 12? And then is there enough transfer talent to make this a NCAA tournament team in the near future?
Yeah. Quick schedule talk. I mean, I guess we should talk a little about Washington. I mean, this game's happening 24 hours from now, so there's a good chance that a number of y'all listening already know the outcome of this. So I don't think we should expect or spend too much time on this opponent. We'll say this was a team that won 7 of their 9 home games last year. They were 56th in the RPI last year, but they also lost their I think it was 4 of their top 5 scorers, and 21 of the 28 players on their roster are listed as freshmen or sophomores. It's going to be a very different looking team than last year's Washington team, which also makes it easy for me to be like, we don't know very much about them. They're a lot younger than last year. The game has probably happened by the time you're listening to it. But I would say even with Washington looking fairly young, probably a team that's going to take at least somewhat of a step back from last year, there's still a pretty big gulf between what last year's Cougar soccer team was and a team that's capable of beating even a bottom half Pac-12 team at their place. So I'll be still really excited if the Cougars could get the win against Washington. Heck, I think I'll feel pretty decent if the Cougars get a tie where they don't get just dramatically outshot and outpaced and all the counting statistics. So not a game that's impossible. We're not talking about this like, I think it's just damage limitation. No, I think the Cougars, there's a scenario where they actually do win this game, but the acknowledgement that, yes, we're really excited for all the reasons that we listed off about this team and potentially being better than last year, but a lot we don't know about them. And winning at Washington, who could still be your best, probably will be your best non-conference opponent, is still a challenge.
Yeah, a team that narrowly missed the NCAA tournament last year, but did win 10 games, finished, pretty respectably in the RPI, made the Sweet 16 3 seasons ago in that weird 2021 spring season. So certainly a program with some pedigree there. But like you mentioned, they had 6 players with at least 4 goals last year, and only 2 of those 6 do return. So this feels like a game that should be squarely in the challenging but winnable category. As Houston will be on the road for their season opener, and then the home opener will be this Sunday when they'll be hosting Southeastern Louisiana, who finished 202 in the RPI last year. Their only game against the power conference team last year, which is what Houston now is, they lost 5-0 to Ole Miss. Also lost by 2 goals to a Houston Christian team. Still doesn't sound right. A HCU team that Houston beat by 2 goals. So in terms of common opponents, that's a pretty good data point for the Cougs. So, that feels like a game that should be squarely in the, you kind of got to win this one category.
Yeah, certainly. I think I actually have in my notes HBU. I temporarily memory hold the name change because I noticed that they were 4 slots below HBU, which is HBU, HCU, a team that U of H has, even in the leaner soccer years, generally beaten more years than not, which I think tells you what kind of opponent this is, whereas Washington is like, a lot of outcomes are acceptable. I think if you don't beat Southeast Louisiana, I think you and I start reevaluating all of our really positive feelings about this team if that's what happens.
Absolutely. I think that's going to be it for us. So we'll go ahead and sign our way out. We're going to reiterate what Sam said up front. If you enjoy the podcast, you want to get access to all those cool goodies that Sam mentioned, go to patreon.com/SHpodcast. If you want to get in contact with us, say hi. You can email us shpodcast, tweet at us at shpodcast, or follow us on Blue Sky at podcast.bsky.social. That's going to be it for us. So thanks to you if you made it all the way to the end. And as always,
Go Cougs.